All right, Chapter 5 of The American Plague. It was our duty. Thursday, September 5th. It was clear that the fever was winning. People were still streaming from the city in droves. Houses, businesses, and shops were closed and dark. The sick and dying and dead were everywhere to be seen. Amid all of this, a remarkable meeting took place at the Free African Society on 5th Street, just south of Walnut. The Free African Society was founded in 1787, the first organization in America created by blacks for blacks. Its purpose was to help members who were destitute and to provide care for widows and fatherless children. On that Thursday, the elders of the society assembled to consider something extraordinary. Would they use their association's members and their skills to help the struggling white neighborhood? A few days before, a letter had arrived from Benjamin Rush, urging the society to help nurse the sick and attend to the dead. One reason they should come forward, Rush contended, was that God had seen fit to grant blacks a special resistance to the dreaded disease. In reality, this wasn't true. A small number of blacks who had grown up either in Africa or the West Indies had the disease as children and survived. Through this encounter with the fever, their blood automatically produced antibodies that either fought off the yellow fever virus entirely or reduced its impact on the individuals significantly. Most blacks in Philadelphia didn't have this natural immunity and would suffer the ravages of the fever along with the whites. But early in September, the vast majority of sufferers Rush saw and heard about were white. Rush truly believed what he told the elders. Most of those gathered at the meetings had been slaves at one time and knew how oppressive some of the whites around them could be. And while Philadelphia had approximately 3,000 free blacks, there were still over 200 blacks being kept as slaves. They were also well aware that the opportunities routinely granted to white citizens to raise a public business in politics were still being denied to them. In 1793, over 50% of Philadelphia's blacks were live-in domestic workers doing the cooking, cleaning, laundering, and child rearing for the better-off whites. Every one of them had suffered in one way or another in the hands of the whites, some of them in appalling ways. Two of the elders, Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, had once been worshipers at St. George Methodist Church, a congregation composed of both whites and blacks. The blacks had actually helped erect the church building, and Allen was a preacher popular among all members. Then, one day, as Jones knelt in prayer at the altar, white trustees grabbed him and ordered him to sit in the back of the church. Jones was a large man and strong enough to shake off his attackers, but he did not respond to this mishandling with force of his own. In a calm voice, he told the trustees, "Wait until the prayer is over, and I will trouble you no more." Black parishioners then walked out of St. George's, and Jones and Allen then each established a separate church of his own. As recently as the very summer that they had been shown their position in Philadelphia society that is now pleading for their help. Several black leaders had attempted to raise $3,000 in order to build a new church, only to discover that few whites were willing to contribute. But when the refugees of Santo Domingo began arriving, those same people were eager to hand over more than $15,000 in donations for the new arrivals' relief. Adding to the insult was the fact that many of these refugees had brought along their own slaves. If a group of individuals had reason to ignore the sufferings of their neighbors, the elders of the Free African Society certainly did. Yet, they did not hesitate. They were, as Jones and Allen would later write, sensible that it was our duty to do all the good we could offer to our fellow mortals. The elders went out that very day in pairs, visiting houses around the city. Jones and Allen went together and immediately discovered a house in tiny Emsley's Alley, where a mother had already died. The father was dying, and two small children huddled together, frightened and hungry. They sent word to the city hall and went to another and another and another house. "We visited upward of 20 families that day," they recalled, and they were scenes of woe indeed. Volunteers from the Free African Society were the first to encounter the homes of most fever victims. What they saw was burned forever into their memory. Many whose friends and relations had left them, Jones and Allen said, died unseen and unassisted. We found them in various situations, some laying on the floor as bloody as if they had been dipped in it, without any appearance of having even a drink of water for their relief. Others laying in a bed with their clothes on, as if they had come in fatigued and laid down for a rest, in appearance as if they had fallen down dead on the floor. The next day, Jones and Allen went to Mayor Clarkson to ask how their group could be of help. To say that Clarkson was grateful for their aid is an understatement. Everyone else the mayor had counted on to help battle the spreading fever, leaders in the business community, church groups, elected representatives, and civil servants, had fled in terror. The Free African Society was the one and only group to step forward and offer its services. After this, whenever anyone requested help, the society sent a volunteer as quickly as possible. No set fee was charged for their services, which might include nursing the individual, cleaning up the sick room, washing clothes and linens, going out to buy food and medicine, and caring for other family members. If an individual could afford to pay $1 or $2 for a full day's care, the money was accepted. But since the people they helped were usually poor, the black nurses often stayed and helped the person for no money at all. Within a few days, a problem developed. Demanded for in-home house care exceeded the number of nurses available. Neighbors who could afford it soon began bidding against one another for the services available, until there were times when a nurse's fee would reach $4 or $5 a day. This was a great deal of money when you consider the average yearly income in Philadelphia then was around $200. Virtually anyone supplying goods or services in the city had raised their rates, explaining that shortages of items and general danger forced up their cost. Yet it was only the black nurses who were openly criticized. This anger eventually led to black nurses being abused verbally in the streets, and in a few cases, male nurses were physically attacked. These complaints made their way to Clarkson, though he was misled to believe that the black nurses were going about town demanding exorbitant rates for their work. It was only when he met with Jones and Allen to discuss the situation that he learned that the white citizens were the ones who were bidding up prices. The mayor knew he couldn't order black nurses to refuse any fee over $1. If he forced them to hold down their costs, he would have to do the same with every merchant, laborer, and farmer doing business in town. How much food would he be brought to the market if he insisted only pre-plague prices be charged? How many carters would haul away the deceased corpse? What would happen with the black nurses as a classic example of demand exceeding supply, resulting in higher prices and nothing more? So Clarkson immediately issued a statement expressing his complete support for the efforts of the society. He also had an ad published in the newspaper that admonished citizens to cease bothering the black nurses as they went about town to do their work. Once this controversy was put aside, members of the Free African Society patrolled the streets daily, rounding up the ill and finding shelter for homeless children. If word came to them that a fever victim was shut up at home without anyone to care for him or her, Jones and Allen sent a respective representative to investigate. The most seriously ill were taken by cart to Bush Hill. The dead were placed in coffins and hauled to graveyards. To do this sort of work, Jones and Allen had to mobilize an army of helpers. Exactly how many blacks were involved in the relief effort is not known. They stepped forward to save lives and relieve suffering, and did so without thought of receiving individual acclaim. We know that Jones and Allen were in direct contact with approximately 300 blacks, and that there were far more black nurses, both male and female, than white nurses. The names of most of these nurses have been lost in history. In their book, Jones and Allen mention William Gray, who organized and supervised the burying of the dead, and Cyrus Bustill, who helped recruit volunteers, as well as Sampson, Sarah Bass, Mary Scott, and Caesar Cranshaw. Named and unnamed, they were noticed moving about the city performing tasks others shunned. The vomit that yellow fever patients spewed forth, as well as the blood and offensive odors, were particular horrors to most people, even those medically trained. Young Dr. Isaac Carthrall found these bodily discharges disgusting. The matter ejected from the stomach was a dark color resembling coffee grounds, sometimes mixed with blood, great flatulency, hemorrhages of different parts of the body, tongue frequently covered with blood, urine very offensive. Not only were these evacuations and odors loathsome, they were considered dangerous. Dr. Catherall knew a nurse who I am almost certain received the infection from a patient, for the matter thrown up by vomiting emitted a peculiarly fotid smell, which affected her soon after she carried out of the room. Dr. Catherall flatly refused to touch the vomit of the patient or for any reason, as did most other people. The black nurse, however, had no choice. Their job, after all, was to care and clean up the patients. 21-year-old Isaac Heston was quick to appreciate the work being done by Philadelphia's blacks. I don't know what the people would do, he said in the letter to his brother, if not for these African Americans, as they are the principal nurses. This battalion of heroes ventured out into the stricken city every day without fail. Thus were many of the nurses circumstanced, Jones and Allen would note, alone until the patient died, then called away to another scene of distress, and thus have been a week or 10 days left to do the best they could without sufficient rest, many of them having some of the dearest connections sick. Sorry. Now I gotta find my spot. Connections sick at home and suffering for want, while their husbands, wife, father, mother have been engaged in the service of the white people. As the days wore on, they took more and more of the burden of carrying the city's ill. When the men hauling victims to Bush Hill reported the appalling conditions there, the Free African Society sent nurses, and most carpenters gone from the city the supply coffins soon ran out. The society set in purchasing boards and construction coffins, and then the inevitable happened. Traveling through the diseased city, venturing out into stifling alleyways, blacks began coming down with the fever. Suddenly, almost overnight, scores of them were seized with the same horrible symptoms as their white neighbors. Richard Allen fell ill, and Absalom Jones had to shoulder the entire burden of keeping the relief effort organized. As more and more blacks sickened and then died, a shudder went through the white community. What would happen if the blacks responded to the pestilence in the same way as the whites, with panic and flight? Who would be left to deal with the sick and dead? If the disorder should continue to spread among them, a very gloomy Benjamin Rush commented, then will the measure of our suffering be full. That is the end of chapter 5.